Among the many investigations that Donald Trump and his circle are now facing is the active criminal probe into Donald Trump's inaugural committee, how it raised a record $107 million, and where exactly all that money went. Federal prosecutors in New York, New Jersey, and Washington, D.C. have issued subpoenas as part of an investigation into a range of issues, including whether foreign donors illegally donated to the inaugural committee in exchange for influence and political favors, as well as whether donor money was funneled into the Trump Organization through inflated fees for rooms, meals, and event spaces. House Democrats are also investigating. Now, the White House maintains that Trump himself could not have done anything wrong because he just simply wasn't involved.
On the inaugural committee, that doesn't have anything to do with the president or the first lady. The biggest thing the president did in his engagement in the inauguration was to come here and raise his hand and take the oath of office. The president was focused on the transition during that time and not on any of the planning for the inauguration.
No idea what's going on, very little interest, totally checked out. A new report suggests that claim was false. Bloomberg reporting today that Trump was actively involved in planning the inauguration and fussed over everything from tablecloths to a performance from the Rockettes. The reporter who broke that story, Caleb Melby of Bloomberg, joins me now. Good to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
What did you learn about the level of the president's involvement with the inauguration?
Our sources tell us that he was intimately involved, as you said, from everything from decor to the performances. But also, more importantly, we're told that Tom Barrack, his longtime friend, who was chairman of the inaugural committee, told staff President Trump, President-elect Trump, wants to know everything about the finances, and keep that in mind when you're making your budgets. And during a lot of those planning meetings, he would call up Trump in real time so Trump could weigh in and help with the decision-making process. And again, that was on a whole gamut of topics and issues.
What is the decor one?
There were going to be these white, really retro white leather tables at Trump's candlelight dinner. And he was shown photos of what those table settings were going to look like. And he said he needed tablecloths. He could not imagine a black tie dinner without tablecloths. And he got his tablecloths.
Okay, I got to respect that. And the Rockettes, he wanted to make sure they were locked down to perform. This was like a presidential-elect imperative.
Yes. As you may recall, they had been announced just before Christmas, but then some of the Rockettes were unhappy about performing for Trump, given his politics. They had political differences. So he was really concerned. Trump has liked the Rockettes for decades. And
he's just about to be the most powerful man in the world, just stressing the Rockettes. Are they coming to my inaugural party?
They're great performers.
They are.
And yeah, he called to make sure, hey, do we have the Rockettes on?
All right, so he's consulting on the tables, the performers, the Rockettes. He's getting patched in live to conversations about planning. Barrack says he intimately connected with the finances. Barrack, of course, says he's cooperating with investigations.
Barrack has said that, yeah, with the House Judiciary and all the subpoenas. Yeah.
Okay, so he's got subpoenas happening. Do we know if the president played a role in fundraising, which seems like one of the key nexuses here?
We don't know that yet. So there was actually multiple fundraising efforts going on at this point in time, right? So there's the inaugural one, which raised a record $107 million. But at the same time, there's like the Trump Victory Fund, right? And there's other teams raising money for other purposes at the same time.
What do we know about what investigators are looking at with respect to the inauguration?
So far, it is incredibly broad. As you said, they're looking at how money was raised, who it was raised from, how it was spent, and conversations with donors about, as you said, whether or not there was any expectation for anything in return. And we don't know where they're going across that entire spectrum of information.
One of the things we do know, though, is that in terms of regulation, inaugural funds are kind of Wild West, right?
Absolutely.
There are essentially no regulations, although obviously bribing people is illegal in any circumstance. But you can take any amount of money from anyone that, as long as they're not a foreign national. Is that basically the rules of the road?
That's right. If they're a U.S. citizen or a U.S.-based company, it's fair game.
And we already also know that at least one foreign individual had a straw purchaser to come to the inauguration, right?
Yes. So Rick Gates, who is deputy chairman of the inaugural, who had, of course, worked with Paul Manafort on the campaign and before that in Ukraine, another one of their associates, a guy by the name of Sam Patton, used a straw donor to donate $50,000 on behalf of a Ukrainian oligarch.
So there's just one example, but that's the one that's been pinned down, and we do know
Yes.
that Rick Gates is cooperating with federal investigators with the Mueller team, correct?
Yes.
So there may be more to learn from that. Caleb Melby, thanks for being with me tonight. Appreciate
Thanks
it.
for having me.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.